Across the rugged northern frontier of Roman Britain, a line of stone and earth stretches from coast to coast. It traverses windswept hills, river valleys, and exposed crags, marking a boundary that once defined the limits of imperial authority. Known today as Hadrian's Wall, this structure is often described simply as a defensive barrier. Yet such a description, while not inaccurate, is incomplete. The wall was not merely a fortification, it was the product of a sophisticated and carefully organized system of engineering, logistics, and administration. Its construction reveals a deeper story about how the Roman Empire understood territory, control, and the projection of power at its edges. When construction began around AD 122, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, the Roman Empire had reached a stage of consolidation. Expansion, which had defined earlier imperial policy, was no longer pursued with the same intensity. Instead, attention turned toward securing borders, regulating movement, and stabilizing regions that had proven difficult to integrate. Britain, at the empire's northwestern extremity, presented particular challenges. While much of southern Britain had been incorporated into the Roman provincial system, the lands beyond remained outside effective control. Ancient sources, including brief references in the writings of Roman historians, suggest that Hadrian visited Britain early in his reign. During this visit, a decision was made to establish a fixed frontier. The wall, extending approximately 117 kilometers from the River Tyne in the east to the Solway Firth in the west, was the physical manifestation of that policy. However, archaeological evidence indicates that its purpose extended beyond simple defense. It functioned as a controlled boundary, an interface between the Roman world and the territories beyond. The choice of route was neither arbitrary nor purely geographical. Surveyors selected a line that took advantage of natural features while maintaining strategic visibility. In the central sector, the wall follows the Windsill, a ridge of volcanic dolerite that provides a natural elevated platform. From this vantage point, wide expanses of land could be observed, reducing the need for additional defensive structures. The decision to align the wall along this ridge reflects a nuanced understanding of terrain and its integration into engineered design. Construction methods varied along the length of the wall, revealing adaptations to local conditions and evolving planning decisions. In the eastern sections, the wall was built primarily of dressed stone, with a width originally intended to reach approximately 3 meters. In contrast, the western stretches initially employed turf construction, using layers of compacted earth and sod. This divergence has prompted considerable scholarly discussion. Some historians argue that the variation reflects differences in available materials, while others suggest that construction may have begun simultaneously at multiple points, each using locally accessible resources. The wall was not a uniform structure. It was punctuated at regular intervals by milecastles, small fortifications placed roughly every Roman mile, and by turrets positioned between them. These installations served as observation posts and controlled access points. Larger forts, built either attached to or slightly offset from the wall, housed garrisons of auxiliary troops. Together, these elements formed a continuous system rather than an isolated barrier. Archaeological excavations have revealed that the construction process itself was highly organized. Roman legions stationed in Britain were responsible for building the wall, and inscriptions found along its length record the involvement of specific units. These inscriptions, often carved into stone, provide valuable evidence of how labor was divided and coordinated. They suggest a level of administrative oversight that ensured consistency across vast distances. The logistics of construction were considerable. Stone had to be quarried, shaped, and transported. Timber was required for scaffolding and internal structures. Roads facilitated the movement of materials and personnel. In many cases, temporary camps were established near construction zones, indicating that work progressed in phases. The presence of standardized building techniques across different sections implies that engineers operated under shared guidelines, even as they adapted to local challenges. One of the most revealing aspects of the wall's engineering lies in its foundations. Excavations show that builders prepared the ground carefully, leveling surfaces and laying substantial base courses to support the weight of the structure. In areas where the terrain was uneven or unstable, additional reinforcement was added. Such attention to foundational stability reflects an understanding of long-term durability rather than short-term expediency. The wall also incorporated a wide ditch on its northern side in many sections. This feature, often referred to as the vallum ditch, enhanced the barrier's effectiveness by creating an additional obstacle. However, the presence of another earthwork to the south, the vallum proper, introduces further complexity. This southern ditch and its accompanying mounds run parallel to the wall but are not strictly defensive in the same way. Scholars have proposed various interpretations of its purpose. Some suggest it marked a controlled military zone, restricting access to the wall from the south. Others argue that it may have functioned as a communication or transport boundary within the Roman system. The integration of these multiple elements indicates that the wall was conceived as part of a broader landscape of control. It was not an isolated structure but a component of an interconnected network that included roads, forts, and supply lines. The Staingate Road, which predates the wall, runs parallel to its southern side and appears to have played a crucial role in supplying garrisons and facilitating movement along the frontier. The decision to build the wall north of this existing road suggests a strategic shift, extending the line of control while maintaining logistical efficiency. Water management was another critical consideration. In regions where streams intersected the wall, engineers constructed culverts to allow water to pass through without compromising structural integrity. These features demonstrate an awareness of environmental factors and their potential impact on long-term stability. In some areas, drainage systems were incorporated to prevent water accumulation at the base of the wall, which could weaken foundations over time. The question of how the wall functioned in daily operation remains an area of active research. While it undoubtedly served as a barrier, its numerous gateways indicate that movement across the frontier was not entirely prohibited. Instead, it appears to have been regulated. Milecastles and forts likely acted as checkpoints where goods and individuals could be inspected. This interpretation aligns with broader Roman practices of border control, which often emphasized monitoring and taxation rather than complete exclusion. Material evidence supports this view. Artifacts discovered at various sites along the wall include items associated with trade, such as pottery and coins from different regions of the empire. These findings suggest that economic activity persisted along the frontier, facilitated rather than hindered by the wall's presence. The controlled movement of goods would have allowed the Roman administration to exert influence beyond the immediate boundary, extending its reach through economic as well as military means. The construction of Hadrian's wall also reflects the adaptability of Roman engineering. Plans appear to have changed during the building process. In several locations, the width of the wall was reduced from its original design, a modification that may have been made to expedite completion or conserve resources. Similarly, some forts were added after initial construction had begun, indicating that strategic priorities evolved over time. These adjustments demonstrate that the wall was not a static project but a dynamic one, responsive to practical considerations and emerging needs. Despite its scale and complexity, the wall was not an impenetrable defense against large-scale invasion. Its primary function was more subtle. It defined a boundary, imposed order, and created a visible symbol of imperial presence. For those living on either side, it would have represented both a physical obstacle and a psychological marker of division. Understanding the engineering of Hadrian's wall requires moving beyond the image of a simple stone barrier. It involves examining how design, terrain, materials, and administrative organization were brought together to create a system that could endure for centuries. The surviving remains, though weathered and fragmented, continue to offer insights into this process. Through careful study, archaeologists and historians have reconstructed not only the structure itself but the intentions behind it. In the landscape of northern Britain, the wall still follows its ancient course, rising and falling with the contours of the land. Its stones bear the marks of tools used nearly 2 millennia ago, and its foundations remain embedded in the earth. These physical traces provide a direct connection to the engineers and laborers who built it, revealing a level of precision and coordination that reflects the broader capabilities of the Roman Empire. As research continues, new discoveries refine our understanding of how the wall was planned and constructed. Advances in archaeological techniques, including geophysical surveys and digital mapping, have allowed scholars to examine sections of the wall and its associated features with increasing detail. These methods have uncovered previously unknown structures and clarified relationships between different elements of the frontier system. The story of Hadrian's Wall, therefore, is not only about its construction in the 2nd century AD. It is also about the ongoing effort to interpret its remains and to understand the complex interplay of factors that shaped it. The engineering choices embedded in its design offer a window into Roman priorities and capabilities, revealing a frontier that was as much about management and organization as it was about defense. Beyond the initial phase of construction, the continued development of Hadrian's Wall reveals a process that was neither rigid nor uniform. Instead, it reflects an evolving frontier system, shaped by changing military requirements, administrative decisions, and practical experience on the ground. Archaeological evidence indicates that even as the wall was being built, modifications were introduced, suggesting that Roman planners were responding to conditions as they encountered them rather than strictly adhering to a fixed blueprint. One of the most significant aspects of this evolution can be seen in the addition and expansion of forts along the wall's line. While the earliest design appears to have emphasized milecastles and turrets as the primary installations, larger forts were later integrated into the system at intervals. These forts, capable of housing several hundred soldiers, were positioned either directly on the wall or slightly to its south. Their construction required alterations to the wall itself, including the widening of gateways and the reconfiguration of adjacent structures. Historians continue to examine the reasons behind this shift. Some scholars suggest that the original plan underestimated the number of troops required to effectively manage the frontier. Others propose that the forts were added as part of a broader reorganization of military deployment in Britain. The evidence does not point to a single definitive explanation, but it does indicate that the wall's design was flexible enough to accommodate significant changes without compromising its overall function. The internal layout of these forts demonstrates a high degree of standardization, consistent with Roman military architecture across the empire. Within their walls, buildings were arranged according to established patterns, including barracks, granaries, headquarters buildings, and workshops. The presence of granaries is particularly notable, as it highlights the importance of supply management. Grain and other provisions had to be stored securely to sustain garrisons over extended periods, especially during the winter months when transport could become more difficult. Supply logistics formed a critical component of the wall's operation. The frontier was not self-sufficient. It depended on a steady flow of resources from other parts of the province and beyond. Roads connected the wall to major settlements in southern Britain, enabling the movement of food, equipment, and personnel. The Staingate Road remained central to this network, serving as a logistical backbone that linked forts and facilitated rapid communication. Archaeological findings along these routes provide insight into the scale and organization of supply efforts. Storage facilities, including large granaries with raised floors and ventilation systems, indicate careful planning to prevent spoilage. The construction of these buildings reflects an understanding of environmental conditions and the need to preserve resources over long periods. In some cases, evidence of repair and reconstruction suggests that supply infrastructure was maintained continuously, adapting to wear and changing demands. The soldiers stationed along the wall were not drawn exclusively from Italy or the central regions of the empire. Instead, they were primarily auxiliary troops recruited from various provinces. Inscriptions and artifacts reveal the presence of units originating from regions as diverse as modern-day Spain, Germany, and Syria. This diversity underscores the interconnected nature of the Roman military system, in which units could be deployed far from their places of origin. The composition of these garrisons has implications for understanding daily life on the frontier. Auxiliary soldiers often brought with them elements of their own cultural practices, which could blend with local traditions and Roman customs. Evidence of religious activity, including altars and inscriptions dedicated to a range of deities, suggests a complex cultural environment within the forts. These findings indicate that the wall was not only a military installation but also a place where different cultural influences intersected. Living conditions within the forts varied depending on rank and role. Officers occupied more spacious accommodations, often with access to amenities such as heated rooms. Ordinary soldiers lived in barracks, typically arranged in long rows with shared facilities. Excavations have uncovered remains of heating systems, including hypocausts, which circulated warm air beneath floors. These features demonstrate an effort to maintain a degree of comfort, even in the challenging climate of northern Britain. Water supply was another essential consideration. Wells and cisterns were constructed within forts to ensure access to fresh water. In some locations, aqueduct-like channels or pipes brought water from nearby sources. The engineering of these systems reflects a broader Roman emphasis on infrastructure and public health, even in remote military settings. Maintaining a reliable water supply would have been crucial not only for drinking but also for cooking, cleaning, and various industrial activities. The presence of workshops within forts indicates that a range of tasks was carried out on site. Blacksmithing, carpentry, and leatherworking were among the activities necessary to support military operations. Tools, weapons, and equipment required regular maintenance and repair, and the ability to perform these tasks locally reduced dependence on distant supply centers. This self-sufficiency contributed to the resilience of the frontier system. Outside the forts, civilian settlements known as vici developed over time. These communities were not formally planned as part of the initial construction but emerged organically as soldiers, traders, and families established themselves near military installations. Archaeological evidence suggests that these settlements included houses, shops, and places of worship. The relationship between the military and these civilian populations was complex, involving economic exchange as well as social interaction. Some historians argue that the growth of these settlements reflects the stabilizing influence of the wall. By creating a defined frontier with regulated movement, the Roman administration may have encouraged economic activity in its vicinity. Others caution that the evidence is uneven and that the extent of civilian development likely varied from one location to another. Nevertheless, the existence of these communities highlights the broader impact of the wall beyond its immediate military function. The gateways along the wall played a central role in regulating movement. These openings were carefully constructed, often with double gates and guard chambers. Their design allowed for the controlled passage of individuals and goods, enabling officials to monitor and, where necessary, restrict access. The presence of such gateways supports the interpretation of the wall as a managed boundary rather than a completely closed barrier. Coins and other small finds recovered from gateway areas provide additional clues about their use. The concentration of these items suggests frequent activity, possibly including trade transactions and the collection of taxes or tolls. While direct documentary evidence is limited, parallels with other Roman frontiers indicate that economic regulation was an integral aspect of border management. The wall, therefore, functioned not only as a line of defense but also as a point of interaction between different regions. The maintenance of the wall required ongoing effort. Weathering, erosion, and structural stress would have necessitated regular repairs. Archaeological studies have identified phases of rebuilding and reinforcement, indicating that the wall was not left to deteriorate after its initial construction. In some sections, stones were reused or repositioned, reflecting practical approaches to maintenance that balance durability with available resources. Changes in imperial policy also influenced the wall's development. Within a few decades of its construction, a new frontier was established further north, known as the Antonine Wall. This shift suggests that Roman authorities were experimenting with different approaches to frontier management. However, the Antonine Wall was later abandoned, and attention returned to Hadrian's Wall, which continued to serve as the primary boundary in the region. The reasons for these changes remain a subject of scholarly debate. Some historians attribute the northern expansion to a desire for greater territorial control, while others emphasize the challenges of maintaining such an extended frontier. The eventual reoccupation and refurbishment of Hadrian's Wall indicate that it offered a more sustainable solution under prevailing conditions. This pattern of expansion and contraction reflects the broader dynamics of Roman frontier policy, which could adapt to shifting circumstances. Environmental factors also played a role in shaping the wall's use and maintenance. The climate of northern Britain, characterized by frequent rainfall and temperature fluctuations, would have affected both the structure itself and the daily lives of those stationed there. Evidence of drainage systems and reinforced foundations suggests that engineers anticipated some of these challenges. Nevertheless, the need for continuous upkeep underscores the demanding nature of maintaining such a large installation in a harsh environment. The integration of communication systems along the wall further illustrates its complexity. Signal towers and elevated positions allowed for the transmission of messages over long distances, likely using visual signals such as smoke or fire. While direct evidence for specific signaling methods is limited, the strategic placement of turrets and forts supports the idea that communication was an essential component of frontier management. Rapid transmission of information would have enabled coordinated responses to potential threats or incidents. Taken together, these elements reveal a structure that was far more than a static barrier. Hadrian's wall functioned as a dynamic system, incorporating military, economic, and administrative components into a cohesive whole. Its engineering cannot be understood in isolation from these broader contexts. Each stone, ditch, and gateway formed part of an integrated network designed to manage the complexities of a distant frontier. The continued study of the wall and its associated features has deepened our understanding of how the Roman Empire operated at its limits. Excavations, surveys, and analytical techniques have uncovered layers of activity that extend beyond the initial construction phase, revealing a history of adaptation and resilience. Through this evidence, the wall emerges not simply as a line across the landscape, but as a testament to the capacity of Roman engineering to respond to both immediate and long-term challenges. In examining these developments, it becomes clear that the secret of Hadrian's wall's engineering lies not in hidden mechanisms or undiscovered features, but in the sophistication of its design and the flexibility of its implementation. It represents a convergence of planning, resource management, and practical experience, an embodiment of how the Roman Empire translated strategic intent into physical form along one of its most remote frontiers. The engineering of Hadrian's wall cannot be fully understood without examining the materials, techniques, and labor systems that made its construction possible. Beneath its visible remains lies a record of decisions shaped by geology, resource availability, and the organizational structure of the Roman military. Each section of the wall reflects a balance between standardized practice and local adaptation, revealing how Roman engineers translated broad design principles into practical execution across varied terrain. Stone, where available, formed the most durable component of the wall. In the eastern and central sectors, builders made extensive use of locally quarried sandstone and dolerite. The process of quarrying required careful planning. Stone had to be extracted in blocks of manageable size, shaped to fit construction needs, and transported to building sites. Archaeological evidence from quarry sites suggests that this work was carried out systematically, with clear signs of tool marks and extraction techniques consistent with Roman methods. The shaping of stone blocks was not uniform across the entire wall. In some areas, stones were carefully dressed into regular shapes, allowing for tightly fitted masonry with minimal gaps. In others, particularly where time or resources may have been limited, stones were less precisely cut and set with mortar to compensate for irregularities. This variation has prompted discussion among historians regarding the degree of standardization enforced during construction. While the overall design remained consistent, the execution appears to have been influenced by local conditions and the pace of work. Mortar played a critical role in binding the stonework. Composed primarily of lime mixed with sand and water, it provided cohesion and stability. The production of lime required the burning of limestone in kilns, a process that demanded both fuel and careful temperature control.
Evidence of lime kilns near sections of the wall indicates that mortar production was organized close to construction sites, reducing the need for long-distance transport of finished materials. In contrast to the stone-built sections, the western portion of the wall initially employed turf construction. This method involved cutting blocks of turf and stacking them in layers to form a solid embankment. While less durable than stone, turf could be assembled more rapidly and with fewer specialized tools. The choice to use turf in this region may reflect both the relative scarcity of suitable stone and the urgency of establishing a continuous frontier. Later modifications replaced many of these turf sections with stone, suggesting a long-term preference for more permanent materials once initial construction was complete. The foundation of the wall was a critical element in ensuring its longevity. Builders prepared the ground by removing loose soil and leveling the surface. In some areas, a trench was dug to create a stable base, which was then filled with compacted material. Large stones were often laid at the bottom to distribute weight evenly. This approach reduced the risk of subsidence and structural failure, particularly in regions where the soil was prone to shifting. Where the wall crossed uneven or rocky terrain, engineers adapted their methods accordingly. On steep slopes, the structure was stepped to follow the natural contours of the land. In areas of exposed bedrock, the wall could be anchored directly onto the surface, providing a stable foundation without the need for extensive excavation. These adjustments demonstrate a practical understanding of how to integrate construction with the existing landscape, minimizing unnecessary labor while maintaining structural integrity. The transportation of materials posed a significant logistical challenge. Stone blocks, timber, and other supplies had to be moved across considerable distances, often over difficult terrain. The Roman military relied on a combination of pack animals, carts, and human labor to accomplish this task. Roads played a vital role in facilitating movement, and in some cases, temporary tracks may have been established specifically for construction purposes. The coordination required to manage these efforts reflects a high level of administrative control. Labor was organized primarily through the Roman legions stationed in Britain. These units possessed not only military training but also the technical skills necessary for large-scale construction. Soldiers were accustomed to building fortifications, roads, and camps as part of their regular duties. Inscriptions found along the wall frequently record the names of legions responsible for particular sections, providing direct evidence of their involvement. These records suggest that work was divided into segments, with each unit assigned a specific portion to complete. The presence of standardized measurements across the wall indicates the use of consistent surveying techniques. Roman surveyors employed tools such as the grommer and chorobates to establish straight lines and level surfaces. The alignment of the wall over long distances, often maintaining remarkable consistency despite variations in terrain, attests to the accuracy of these methods. This precision was essential not only for structural reasons but also for ensuring that different construction teams could work simultaneously without creating discontinuities. One of the most distinctive features of the wall's engineering is the regular spacing of milecastles and turrets. These intervals were measured according to Roman units, with milecastles placed approximately every Roman mile and turrets positioned between them. The consistency of this spacing suggests careful planning at the outset of construction. It also implies that surveyors established reference points along the route before building began, allowing for coordinated progress across multiple sections. The gateways within milecastles were constructed with particular attention to durability and control. Stone jambs and lintels framed the openings, and grooves for doors indicate that they could be securely closed when necessary. Guard chambers flanked these points, providing space for personnel to monitor movement. The design of these gateways reflects a balance between accessibility and security, enabling regulated passage while maintaining the integrity of the frontier. Drainage systems were integrated into the wall's design to address the challenges posed by the local climate. Northern Britain experiences frequent rainfall, and without proper drainage, water accumulation could weaken foundations and erode structural components. Engineers incorporated culverts and channels to direct water away from the wall. In some areas, the ground was shaped to encourage runoff, reducing the likelihood of standing water. These measures demonstrate an awareness of environmental conditions and their potential impact on long-term stability. The vallum, running parallel to the wall on its southern side, adds another layer of complexity to the engineering landscape. This earthwork consists of a central ditch flanked by mounds, creating a barrier that is distinct from the wall itself. Its construction required the excavation of large volumes of earth, which were then carefully arranged to form consistent embankments. The scale of this undertaking indicates that it was an integral part of the overall frontier system rather than an afterthought. The purpose of the vallum remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Some historians interpret it as a means of controlling access to the wall from the south, effectively creating a restricted military zone. Others suggest that it may have served as a boundary for administrative or logistical purposes, delineating areas of responsibility within the frontier system. The absence of definitive contemporary descriptions means that its exact function cannot be stated with certainty. However, its consistent presence alongside the wall underscores its importance within the broader design. Evidence of repair and modification throughout the wall's history provides insight into how its engineering responded to changing conditions. In some sections, original stonework was replaced or reinforced, indicating areas where structural weaknesses may have developed.
Elsewhere, alterations to gateways and internal layouts suggest adjustments in how the wall was used. These changes reflect a process of continuous maintenance and adaptation rather than a single, fixed construction phase. The interaction between the wall and the surrounding environment also influenced its long-term preservation. In areas where vegetation growth was limited and erosion was minimal, substantial portions of the wall have survived. In contrast, sections exposed to more intense weathering or human activity have deteriorated significantly. Archaeological efforts to document and preserve these remains have provided valuable data, but they also highlight the challenges of reconstructing a complete picture from incomplete evidence. Technological analysis has played an increasingly important role in understanding the wall's construction. Techniques such as geophysical surveying and remote sensing have allowed researchers to identify buried features without extensive excavation. These methods have revealed the presence of additional structures, including temporary camps and construction-related installations that were not previously visible. Such findings contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of how the wall was built and how it functioned within its landscape. The study of tool marks on surviving stonework offers further evidence of construction techniques. Variations in chisel patterns and finishing styles can sometimes be linked to specific groups of workers or phases of construction. This level of detail provides a more nuanced view of the labor process, suggesting that while overall planning was centralized, execution involved multiple teams with their own methods and practices. In considering these elements together, the engineering of Hadrian's wall emerges as a complex interplay between design, material, and labor. It reflects not only the technical capabilities of Roman builders but also their ability to organize large-scale projects across challenging environments. The wall's endurance over nearly 2 millennia is a testament to the effectiveness of these methods, even as natural forces and human activity have altered its appearance. The continued examination of its structure reveals that what might appear as a simple line across the landscape is, in fact, the result of careful calculation and sustained effort. Each component, from the foundations beneath the ground to the stones that remain visible today, contributes to a broader understanding of how the Roman Empire approached the task of defining and maintaining it. Over time, the operational life of Hadrian's wall extended far beyond its initial construction, revealing how its engineering was sustained, adapted, and, in some cases, reinterpreted by successive generations of Roman administrators and soldiers. The wall was not a finished monument upon completion in the 2nd century AD, rather, it became a living system, continuously maintained and reshaped in response to shifting military, political, and environmental conditions. One of the most informative aspects of this later history is the pattern of repairs and reconstructions visible along different stretches of the wall. Archaeological evidence shows that sections were periodically dismantled and rebuilt, often using a mixture of original and newly quarried stone. In some places, the masonry style changes noticeably, indicating different phases of work. These variations suggest that maintenance was not carried out uniformly across the entire frontier, but instead responded to localized needs, such as structural weakening, erosion, or strategic reassessment. The forts integrated into the wall system also underwent significant modification. In several cases, internal buildings were replaced or reorganized, reflecting changes in the composition and size of garrisons. For example, barracks were sometimes subdivided or expanded, which may indicate fluctuations in troop numbers or alterations in unit structure. Granaries, too, show evidence of rebuilding, reinforcing the importance of reliable food storage over extended periods of occupation. The continued presence of auxiliary units along the wall is well documented through inscriptions and artifacts. However, the composition of these units appears to have changed over time. Some regiments were relocated, while others were newly introduced. This rotation of forces was a common feature of the Roman military system, allowing for flexibility in deployment and reducing the risk of local entrenchment. The diversity of units stationed at the wall, drawn from across the empire, remained a defining characteristic throughout its active use. Religious practices within the frontier zone provide further insight into daily life during these later phases. Altars and inscriptions dedicated to a variety of deities have been uncovered in and around forts, including both Roman gods and those associated with the soldiers' regions of origin. In some instances, local British deities were also incorporated into these practices, suggesting a degree of cultural integration. The presence of temples and shrines indicates that religious observance was an established part of life along the wall, supported by both individual devotion and organized activity. The civilian settlements that developed alongside military installations continued to evolve as well. These communities, often located just outside fort boundaries, expanded in size and complexity over time. Archaeological findings point to the presence of workshops, inns, and domestic structures, indicating a range of economic activities. Trade between soldiers and civilians appears to have been a consistent feature, supported by the regulated movement of goods through the wall's gateways. Coins discovered in these settlements provide a useful chronological framework for understanding their development. The distribution of coinage suggests periods of economic activity that correspond with phases of military occupation. In some areas, a decline in coin finds may indicate reduced activity or partial abandonment. Although such interpretations must be made cautiously, the archaeological record is inherently incomplete, and variations in preservation can influence the apparent distribution of material evidence. The broader political context of the Roman Empire also influenced the wall's function during this period. The 3rd and 4th centuries AD were marked by a series of challenges, including internal instability and external pressures on multiple frontiers. In Britain, these developments appear to have affected the allocation of military resources. Some scholars argue that troop levels along Hadrian's Wall were reduced at certain times, while others suggest that the frontier remained a priority despite wider imperial concerns. The available evidence does not allow for a definitive conclusion, but it does indicate that the wall's role was shaped by factors extending beyond the immediate region. Modifications to the wall's infrastructure during these centuries may reflect these broader dynamics. In some sections, gateways were narrowed or reinforced, possibly to enhance control over movement. Elsewhere, additional defensive features were introduced, such as strengthened towers or reconfigured fortifications. These changes suggest an ongoing assessment of how best to manage the frontier under varying conditions. The relationship between Hadrian's Wall and other frontier systems in Britain also evolved. The earlier establishment and subsequent abandonment of the Antonine Wall to the north had already demonstrated the limits of extended control in the region. Following its abandonment, Hadrian's Wall resumed its position as the primary boundary. However, its function may have shifted from a forward line of expansion to a more stabilized zone of administration and oversight. Environmental factors continued to play a significant role in the wall's maintenance and use. The effects of weathering, particularly in exposed upland areas, required constant attention. Freeze-thaw cycles, heavy rainfall, and vegetation growth all contributed to gradual deterioration. The evidence of repeated repairs indicates that Roman engineers and soldiers were actively engaged in preserving the wall's structural integrity, even as conditions made this task increasingly demanding. Communication along the wall remained an essential aspect of its operation. The alignment of forts and turrets suggests that lines of sight were maintained wherever possible, allowing for the transmission of signals across distances. While the exact methods used, whether visual signals, messengers, or a combination of both, are not fully documented, the spatial arrangement of these installations supports the conclusion that coordinated communication was integral to frontier management. By the late 4th century AD, signs of decline become more apparent in the archaeological record. Some forts show evidence of reduced occupation, with buildings falling into disrepair or being repurposed for different uses. In certain locations, high-quality materials were removed, possibly for reuse elsewhere. These changes may reflect a gradual withdrawal of centralized control, although the process was likely uneven and varied across different parts of the wall. The end of formal Roman administration in Britain, traditionally dated to the early 5th century AD, marked a significant turning point. Without the support of imperial structures, the systems that had sustained the wall, military organization, supply logistics, and administrative oversight, could no longer function in the same way. However, This did not necessarily result in an immediate or complete abandonment. Evidence suggests that some level of local occupation or reuse continued in certain areas, although the nature and extent of this activity remain subjects of ongoing research. In the centuries that followed, the wall's physical presence in the landscape persisted, even as its original purpose faded. Stones were gradually removed for use in other construction projects, and sections of the wall were incorporated into later structures. The process of dismantling was not systematic but occurred over long periods, influenced by local needs and opportunities. As a result, the wall's appearance changed significantly, with some stretches reduced to low remnants while others remained more substantial. Despite this transformation, the underlying engineering of Hadrian's wall continued to shape the terrain. Its foundations, ditches, and earthworks remained embedded in the landscape, influencing patterns of movement and settlement long after its military role had ended. In some areas, later roads and property boundaries followed the line of the wall, demonstrating how its presence continued to affect human activity. The study of these later phases has been enhanced by advances in archaeological methodology. Stratigraphic analysis, radiocarbon dating, and material studies have allowed researchers to identify distinct periods of construction, use, and modification. These techniques have clarified the sequence of events and provided a more detailed understanding of how the wall evolved over time. Scholarly interpretations of this evidence emphasize the importance of viewing Hadrian's wall as a dynamic system rather than a static monument. Its engineering was not confined to the initial act of construction but extended into centuries of maintenance, adaptation, and eventual transformation. Each phase of its history contributes to a broader picture of how the Roman Empire managed its frontiers and responded to changing circumstances. The enduring remains of the wall, though altered and incomplete, continue to offer valuable insights into this process. They reveal not only the technical capabilities of Roman engineers but also the administrative and logistical frameworks that supported such an ambitious undertaking. Through careful analysis, it becomes possible to trace the life cycle of the wall, from its conception and construction to its adaptation and eventual decline, highlighting the complexity of a structure that has often been understood in simpler terms. As the evidence accumulates, the engineering of Hadrian's wall emerges as an ongoing process, one that reflects both the strengths and limitations of Roman frontier policy. It stands as a record of sustained effort, shaped by practical necessity and informed by experience, offering a detailed perspective on how one of the ancient world's most extensive empires defined and maintained its boundaries over time. In the centuries following the end of Roman administration in Britain, Hadrian's wall entered a new phase of existence, one no longer defined by imperial strategy, but by gradual transformation within a changing cultural and physical landscape. The engineering that had once sustained a functioning frontier system did not disappear, rather, it persisted in altered forms, embedded in the terrain and adapted to new uses by successive populations. Understanding this final stage is essential to appreciating the full scope of the wall's historical significance. After the early 5th century AD, centralized Roman authority in Britain declined, and with it the coordinated systems that had maintained the wall. Military garrisons were no longer supplied through imperial logistics, and the administrative framework that regulated movement and repair ceased to operate. However, archaeological evidence suggests that abandonment was neither immediate nor uniform. In some locations, occupation appears to have continued on a smaller scale, possibly by local groups who adapted existing structures for their own needs. The reuse of materials became a defining feature of this period. Stone from the wall and its associated buildings was removed and repurposed for nearby construction. This process, often referred to as robbing, occurred over many generations. It was not an act of deliberate destruction, but a practical response to the availability of ready-cut building material. Churches, farmhouses, and later fortifications in the surrounding region incorporated stones originally shaped by Roman engineers. As a result, the wall's fabric became dispersed across the landscape, its original form gradually diminishing. Despite this physical reduction, the line of the wall continued to influence patterns of movement and settlement. In certain areas, paths and property boundaries followed its course, reflecting the enduring presence of its foundations and earthworks. The vallum and other associated features remained visible as landscape elements, shaping how people navigated and understood the terrain. This persistence illustrates how large-scale engineering projects can outlast their initial purpose, leaving traces that guide human activity long after their original function has ended. During the medieval period, references to the wall appear in historical writings, although often in fragmentary or interpretive forms. Chroniclers were aware of the structure but did not always understand its origins or purpose. Some attributed it to earlier or later figures, reflecting the gradual loss of direct knowledge about Roman Britain. These interpretations, while not always accurate, indicate that the wall remained a notable feature within the cultural memory of the region. Systematic study of the wall began much later, particularly from the 17th century onward, as antiquarians and scholars sought to document its remains. Early surveys recorded visible sections, inscriptions, and associated features, laying the groundwork for modern archaeological investigation. These efforts marked the beginning of a transition from practical reuse to historical preservation, as the wall came to be recognized not only as a source of material but as an object of scholarly interest. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeological methods became more rigorous, enabling a more detailed understanding of the wall's construction and use. Excavations revealed the foundations of milecastles, the layouts of forts, and the extent of associated settlements. The recovery of inscriptions, tools, and everyday objects provided insight into the people who lived and worked along the frontier. These findings allowed historians to move beyond earlier assumptions and develop interpretations grounded in material evidence. The designation of Hadrian's Wall as a protected site in the modern era reflects this shift in perspective. Preservation efforts have aimed to stabilize surviving sections, prevent further loss, and make the site accessible for study and public engagement. At the same time, conservation presents challenges. Exposure to weather, visitor impact, and natural processes continues to affect the remains. Balancing preservation with accessibility requires ongoing management and careful planning. Advances in technology have further expanded the scope of research. Techniques such as aerial photography, lidar scanning, and geographic information systems have enabled scholars to map the wall and its surroundings with unprecedented precision. These tools have revealed features that are not immediately visible at ground level, including buried structures and subtle variations in terrain. By integrating these data with traditional excavation, researchers have gained a more comprehensive view of how the wall functioned within its broader landscape. One of the most significant outcomes of this research has been a deeper appreciation of the wall as part of an interconnected system. It is now understood not as an isolated barrier, but as a component of a wider network that included roads, forts, supply installations, and civilian settlements. This perspective aligns with broader studies of Roman frontiers across the empire, which emphasize the importance of management, communication, and economic interaction alongside military defense. Historians continue to debate certain aspects of the wall's purpose and operation. While there is general agreement that it served as a boundary and a means of control, the extent to which it functioned as a defensive structure versus a regulatory one remains a topic of discussion. Some scholars emphasize its role in deterring small-scale incursions and monitoring movement, while others highlight its symbolic significance as a visible statement of imperial authority. The available evidence supports elements of both interpretations, suggesting that the wall fulfilled multiple functions simultaneously. The question of how the wall was perceived by those who lived near it is more difficult to answer. Archaeological evidence provides indirect clues, but written sources from local populations are limited. It is likely that perceptions varied depending on proximity, occupation, and cultural background. For Roman soldiers and administrators, the wall represented duty and structure. For traders and civilians, it may have been a point of opportunity as well as restriction. For communities beyond the frontier, it marked the edge of a powerful and organized state. In considering the engineering of Hadrian's Wall, it is important to recognize that its significance lies not only in its physical construction but also in what it reveals about Roman approaches to space and control. The decision to build such a structure reflects a particular understanding of how boundaries could be defined and maintained. Rather than relying solely on natural features or temporary fortifications, the Romans invested in a continuous, permanent line that combined physical presence with administrative function. This approach required a high degree of coordination. Surveyors, engineers, soldiers, and administrators all contributed to the creation and maintenance of the wall. Resources had to be allocated, labor organized, and progress monitored across a distance that spanned the width of northern Britain. The success of this undertaking demonstrates the capacity of the Roman system to manage complex projects over extended periods. At the same time, the wall's history illustrates the limits of such systems. Its construction did not eliminate challenges along the frontier, nor did it remain unchanged in the face of shifting conditions. Adaptation was a constant requirement, and the eventual decline of Roman authority in Britain shows that even the most carefully engineered structures depend on the systems that support them. Today, the remains of Hadrian's wall continue to prompt reflection on these themes. Walking along its surviving, one encounters not only the physical traces of Roman engineering but also the accumulated layers of history that have shaped its current form. Each stone and earthwork carries evidence of construction, use, modification, and reuse, forming a record that spans nearly 2 millennia. The study of the wall remains an active field, with new discoveries contributing to an evolving understanding of its role and significance. As techniques improve and perspectives shift, interpretations may continue to change, but the fundamental importance of the wall as a source of historical insight remains constant. It offers a detailed case study of how an ancient empire approached the challenges of defining and managing it. In the end, the secret of Hadrian's wall lies not in hidden features or lost knowledge, but in the clarity with which it reflects the principles of Roman engineering and administration. Its design integrates terrain, materials, and human organization into a coherent system, one that could be maintained and adapted over centuries. The wall stands as a testament to the capacity of structured planning and sustained effort to shape the landscape in enduring ways. Its presence across northern Britain is a reminder that frontiers are not merely lines on a map, but complex zones of interaction, control, and adaptation. Through the careful study of its remains, it becomes possible to trace how those dynamics were expressed in stone and earth, and how they continued to influence the region long after the empire that built it had withdrawn.